which might not be the primary mode of education or instruction that they experience in school. But let me talk about a global context first, and then we will come into the Indian context. So globally, there are a lot of countries which are either having a multilingualistic background, or countries which have more or less of a single language kind of format, or a monolinguistic format. So a country like, say, Switzerland would have at least 4 languages that people are getting exposed to. Countries similar to the United States, where you have a large amount of population which is immigrated, might have many more languages that people are getting exposed to. Countries like Australia, etc., might also be extremely multilinguistic when it comes to their cultural backgrounds and the societies and how they function. Now, there was an interesting report that was published in the World Economic Forum, and the World Economic Forum kind of identified what is going to be the impact of multilinguistics and multilinguistic focused pedagogy in terms of the economic outcomes of a nation. And I'll give you just 2 data points which are critical to remember here. One is from the point of view of a country, Switzerland. Switzerland, like I told you, has 4 predominant languages. Students are exposed to pedagogy across these 4 different languages. And Switzerland accounts for almost 10% of their GDP because of this multilinguistic culture. On the other hand, the World Economic Forum suggests that Britain or UK, which basically might have a monolinguistic culture, or English is the predominant language, and probably they have very limited skill sets in terms of other languages, or proficiencies are low, might actually be losing out 3.5% of their potential GDP because of a lack of multilinguistic pedagogies and the inability of their society to be able to understand and appreciate multiple languages. So from this global context, we are now coming down to the Indian context. Now, multilinguistics and a cross-cultural domain is part of our DNA. As we all are from different parts of the country, we understand there are different languages that we speak. And we are also seeing that many Indians are now traveling and moving across the nation to different parts of the country. So I personally am from Kerala, but I was born in Jodhpur, Rajasthan. Then I moved to Kerala. Then I worked sometime in Tamil Nadu. And currently I'm working with Indian Institute of Management in Indore, which is in Madhya Pradesh. So you can consider me to be one sample of an Indian student who might see himself or herself moving around this country and trying to converse, trying to interact, trying to be able to make friends and colleagues across this country. So it is in this domain that we also want the youngest of our kids and probably the future of our nation to also be exposed to multilinguistical pedagogies in terms of their foundational literacy and numeracy. Now, when I talk about multilingualism in education, there are a few things that we need to be very clearly focusing upon. And like the secretary mentioned in the morning, when we look at the national curriculum, the national curriculum framework for the foundational levels or foundational stages, we see that there is a lot of emphasis on this, but a lot more needs to be done. So that is what this panel and the panels in the afternoon, as well as what we are going to do in terms of capacity building tomorrow, are going to focus upon. So that is the context here. Now, personally, when I think about multilinguistics in the Indian context, I realize that we need to focus on creating a lot of different competencies, a lot of different attention, a lot of different areas in which attention has to be put across. So when I was thinking how I should articulate my thoughts and how I should be presenting them to you, I basically was thinking about a pyramid. So I want all of you to visualize that there is going to be a pyramid-like structure. Better? So I want all of you to visualize a pyramid-like structure. Now, all of you would remember that the pyramid has 4 corners, and all the 4 corners join together in the top of the pyramid. So let's assume that what we want to achieve in terms of foundational literacy and numeracy of our students between the ages of 3 to 8 is what is the end objective. I see 4 things that need to be put together as 4 corner pieces of this particular. Am I audible? Is it better now? Sorry. Am I audible? Is it better now? Okay, I'm very sorry for that interruption. So we are talking about, or I'm trying to make you visualize a pyramid. The pyramid basically is a structure which has 4 edges and a top that basically comes together. So we are talking about 4 essential areas that we need to focus upon. And the 4 areas that I'm going to talk about or quickly touch upon before I invite my co-panelists also to come in are going to be around the acronym of PLAN, right? So P, L, A, and N. The P here stands for pedagogy, which is going to be the most critical area that we are going to focus and discuss in this particular session. The second element is about leveraging human and technological resources. That is the L in the plan. The third element is to appreciate and create a culture of appreciation of multilinguistic pedagogy and multilinguistic learning. And the fourth element is the nurturing, and the nurturing that the student and the society needs to provide to these kids. So let's quickly get into each of those elements. When I talk about pedagogy, I essentially am talking about the systems, the structures, the curriculum, the assessment tools, etc., etc., etc. Now here, when we bring in a flavor or when we look at it from the lens of multilingualism, we need to then start asking questions a little differently. I'm sure that some of you would have already thought about all of these aspects. In the past decades, the way most of us were educated in our school and in our early years, we would have at best had a bilingual pedagogy. What do I mean by a bilingual pedagogy? We had our own mother tongues. The mother tongue is what we learn from our houses, and then we come to school and we acquire a foreign language. In most occasion, the foreign language that we would have acquired at that point of time would have been English, because that is like the dignitaries mentioned in the morning as well, is a good language for communication. Now, when we talk about the future, maybe these two languages or maybe a bilingual format is not going to be appropriate. We are talking about actual multilingual format or actual multilingual pedagogy that needs to be brought in. So hence, we have to start questioning what are the tools that we are going to provide to our students. The secretary today morning mentioned about the magic box, which was basically the toolkit that was provided to all the teachers so that they can enable themselves in providing the foundational literacy and numeracy skills to students. But are they proficient enough in terms of all the different languages that we are talking about? Are we covering all the different nuances that are important in terms of the characteristics of those specific languages? For example, if you talk about Hindi, versus if you talk about Malayalam or you talk about Kannada, there might be language specific characteristics that need to be brought in. Are we touching upon all of that is something that we have to carefully focus upon. The second aspect that we have to focus upon is how do we want to integrate languages and these multiple languages into our curriculum. When we talk about the traditional way in which we have defined our curriculum, we are talking about a strictly separationalist kind of language structure. What do I mean by a strictly separationalist language structure? We are talking about there being a strict separation in terms of how one language is taught and how another language is taught. This might provide students with kind of competencies and proficiencies in understanding that language. Maybe at a starting level, they might be able to communicate, they might be able to read, they might be able to write, they might be able to have conversations, but they are not going to be able to learn between languages. They are not be able to have any kind of integration, and holistic learning might not take place. So we have questioning ourselves as to what kind of flexible convergence are we trying to in terms of the multiple languages that we are students to. We also have to start asking, what is the purpose of such proficiency? If you look at the way the Indian culture is, the way most parents expect their students to go and study in schools, the end objective is to get a job. The end objective is to get a good employment. The end objective is to be able to do something on your own. And many a times, languages are a means to an end. So you want to make people study English because they want to get a job. You want people to study French because they might have an opportunity outside India. You want people to study Hindi for a particular reason. You want people to study something else for another reason. We should actually start studying languages in terms of the study itself. Because if you look at languages in themselves are ways by which the children are able to associate meanings to different symbols. They are able to understand the structure and the syntax of how different languages function. They are able to understand literature that might be in different languages. And also many a times language is representational of culture. So with multiple languages, students or children might be able to get themselves immersed into this multicultural or cross-cultural environment that India is of right now. We need to understand what kind of mathematical abilities do we need to provide in terms of this multilinguistic atmosphere. When we talk about mathematical abilities or numerical abilities in a multilinguistic atmosphere, we have to also remember about the Indian numerical system. And the Indian numerical system, which is getting lesser and lesser emphasis in today's educational system, needs to be also imparted in terms of this multilingual format. That is what is the first P, where we have to talk about pedagogy. And what I believe, or my views, is that we should should not look at multilingualism as a challenge, but rather we should try to embrace multilingualism in terms of our pedagogy, in terms of our curriculum, and in terms of everything else that we do. The second aspect in the pyramidal structure that I wanted all of you to visualize was leveraging human resources and technological resources. When I say leveraging human resources, we are of course talking about the fundamental people who are involved in imparting education to the student, which are of course the teachers and the leaders in different educational institutions. At Indian Institute of Management, Indore, we have been interacting with a large number of school educators and school principals in terms of various capacity building initiatives. And one thing that keeps coming back to us, and kind of makes us think a lot, is about the need to make teachers and principals appreciate this entire change that is happening in terms of the digital divide, in terms of age compression. So when I say age compression, a student is studying things much faster as compared to what he or she was studying 10 years ago or 15 years ago. It is because of the exposure that they're getting across different platforms, across digital platforms, etc. This digital divides needs to be brought down, and that can only happen in terms of capacity building. And if you look at the Nippon Yojana or the Nippon policy, you basically would find that a lot of students need to be provided individual attention. Now, individual attention would require the teachers to have the capabilities, the teachers to have the kind of time and the ability to provide that attention. So that is where we also want to leverage digital technology. Now, when we talk about digital technology, of course, we have made a lot of strides. We have already put in place a lot of infrastructure. But in many situations, we are trying to support or augment what already exists in terms of content, in terms of asynchronous programs, in terms of tools, etc. But we should now look at digital technology and try to see what could be the technology that can actually replace existing policies and processes, what could be technologies that can be used to supplement and augment what we already have, and what would be things that could be brought in order to create a new system or a new structure. For example, all of you would have heard very recently about the entire space of how artificial intelligence is expanding. And if you look at the way artificial intelligence is expanding, and if you look at how the educational technology, edtech companies are utilizing this space, they are very effectively able to assess the pace at which a particular student is moving in terms of their curriculum, in terms of their learning goals, in terms of their learning objectives. And that is being utilized in order to create an individualized learning plan for the student. This could be something that can be brought in, and the teacher's burden, the teacher's effort can be brought down. So we need to think about and brainstorm what could be those areas where we can actually use technology to replace some of the existing practices, to supplement, as well as to bring in new processes and strengthen the entire curriculum system. The third element and the fourth element are not to do with the school setup or the pedagogy, etc., but things that need to be done at a larger societal level. And that is where we need to, as a society, bring about change, and we need to bring about more appreciation in terms of multilingual pedagogy, especially in the foundational years. Because many a times, like I told you, the society believes that you are able to impart education that is going to get you a job. Maybe studying multiple languages is not so important for the parent, unless the parent has that commitment, unless the society has that commitment in order to enable and in order to encourage multilingual pedagogies in the foundational levels. This objective might not be achieved. So we might need to use information, communication, entertainment, eyes, other kind of societal activities to make people appreciate the importance of multilingual pedagogies, at least in the foundational levels between the ages of 3 and 8. And finally, there needs to be nurturing. And what kind of nurturing am I talking about? I'm talking about nurturing at the home level. Because we are talking about a school education system where the student comes to the school only by the age of 3. And before the age of 3, the student has already been exposed to languages in terms of their mother tongue, maybe got exposed to languages in terms of the content that they see on digital platforms, etc. So there is a very great importance and emphasis that needs to be provided to educating parents, educating families, and probably the Anganwadi networks, the self-help groups, etc., should also be made active participants in this activity. So when I look at multilingualism in the foundational literacy and numeracy format, I see see that these four elements is what we need to focus on: pedagogy, the element of leveraging human and digital technologies, the element of creating appreciative culture among the society and its stakeholders, and finally the element of nurturing within the family in the initial 3 years when the student is not at school. So having said that, I think we have a lot of things to think about, a lot of things to brainstorm and ponder upon. But in the meantime, let me also invite my next speaker, Professor Malavika Kapoor, to come and share her views about this topic and maybe put some more thoughts into our minds. Yes, Professor, please.
The panelists do have the choice of being seated, remain seated, and express their views, as they have the cordless mics also.
Am I audible? Am I audible? Yeah. To start with, I would like to say that I'm going to be very candid and very honest about what I have experienced in my life, so that if I say something which offends somebody, that's okay too, because I represent children. Since my onus of responsibility is with children, I'll have to say the kind of things I will. To start with, I will start with my own experiences and then proceed to how things went on across 3 decades of work with children. Now, we all say we have very good preschools. You know, we send our children to best preschools. I'm sure you all do. And a little girl in Chennai who went to the best schools came and told me, I have finished lower KG, I have finished upper KG, I am so tired, I don't want to go to school anymore. Now, this was to me that something is seriously wrong with our so-called good preschool education. There is something seriously wrong with it. Apart from that, what I have learned bringing up my own children, how difficult it is, how do you manage it. When you care for them, you discipline them, at the same time you reward them. So it is not an easy job to bring up a children. It's very easy to write books about it. Then the next stage is of grandchildren, who are equally important in teaching a lot of things. So between my own children, who I was very committed, didn't do any conferences till they went to school, that was the kind of thing. And then my grandchildren, to whom I can spend a lot of time with, and then what they taught me. So these set of people at home taught me more developmental psychology than any Western textbooks. Then I went on to working with rural children. First, I worked with clinic children in Nemans for several years. Then I started going to rural schools in Bangalore and urban schools. And then 30 years working with the tribal children in the Nagarhole area. So I said, as I started working with the children, I discovered a lot, and especially what Professor Yashpal Sharma said, learn from children what to teach them. So actually my second book I named Learn from Children What to Teach Them. That's the title of my book. So whatever I'm going to talk about today is what I learned from children and no one else. So this is my background, and I will just quickly go through my slides. So since we are in the EC group, am I audible? Yeah? We are at the 8 years group and how important it is. I was in this group as part of, whatever Nipun Bharat and all the efforts. And in various meetings, the 2 agenda items I pushed very hard and got it. One is, whatever you do with the child, it should be child-centric. It is not activities to be given by teachers. It is the activity generated by the children. Whatever you do, it should be child-centric and playway method. Absolutely, playway method is recommended, not unidirectional teaching from the teachers. And the other one, which is very dicey in this part of digital divide, probably I am on the other side of it. I said no gadgets of any kinds to children before 8, because the brain is almost evolved by that time, and the damage you can do is less. But the earlier you give, more damaging it is. I am a clinician. I'm seeing babies with mobile addiction. They won't eat without mobiles. And then how to make them withdraw from it. So I'm seeing what kind of wreaking havoc the technology is doing with the very young children. And I'm very, I think the first speaker said you're replacing the images of one kind with the other. The most dangerous images are coming from the technology, which is replacing our original images of the culture. So, what I'm worried about is not recognizing children's potential. So developmental psychologists like us have done very wrong by not pushing into education and telling them what you're doing is wrong. Because yeah. So the belief is that which they don't know. So I go on to now, what is my evidence that children know more? The first is, the child is a scientist in the crib. That is the title of a book, Empirical Studies about Babies from Zero. And the other is, the child is a linguist in the crib. How can that be? How can the child be a linguist in the crib? I'll go to explain it a little later. The child is a philosopher in the crib. This is my conviction. Now, how do you call a child a philosopher? Okay? Then, child's way of learning happens by dealing with the world around him, between the environment and the child. And they start developing in all domains, be it cognitive, language, emotional, social, moral. I mean, you should see the morality of 2-year-olds to believe it. This happens soon after birth. So, a well-known adage that child's mind is a blooming, buzzing confusion is all wrong. Child is born with basic potential for dealing with the world from the time of birth. So by thinking that we give them it later is a very wrong notion. The present developmental studies show this. And it all occurs through play, nothing else. All through play it occurs. And so we don't need formal methods from this age. Next slide, please. Yeah. Now formal education, very well known, Benjamin Bloom's pyramid, shows these are very important for education. I'm sure most of the educationists are very familiar with this model. But my complaint is this is dealing only with cognitive development. Is that enough? So, you remember, most of the schools don't follow all the layers of pyramid. They rely only on memory and remembering, and that is the lowest level of learning, and that is what is practiced in most schools, that you memorize and that is the end of it. Whereas we have to reach the top, how to make them creative, and very little thought is given in the present educational system, which is suitable for children. FLN group, that's all I'm saying. For higher group, you can follow the same. Next one, please. Everyone is born with the capacity to learn any language. Okay? Language development is instinctive. Every child, as Chomsky says, has a language acquisition device built in. It is a tool found in the brain, which is more a metaphor, but it is true that it's built in. And child rapids his own rules of language, from very simple to more complex sentences. You don't have a grammarian to teach them grammar. It comes when he utters his first words. He has his own logic for it. Grammar is a skill they have to attain later. Here, Lois Bloom studied the language structure of children, how it developed. Tremendous. About 20 years she has worked on it, and she suggested that surrounding environment and people around are very important for the language acquisition. And behaviorists, the so-called one group of psychology, believe that they learn only by mimicry, that instruction and they will learn it. It is not true. Child learns language in multiple ways as it needs to use it. Next one. Now, this is a very interesting study. It is called Million Word Study. It's actually 30 millions. In Hart and Risley's study way back in the 70s of 56 families of white-collar workers and blue-collar workers, and studied their language development. Original study is very, very simple, very basic, and they came out with this statement: children can learn millions of words just by the kind of background these children have, upper class and very low class kind of thing. Now, obviously, this study would lead to a lot of queries. So till today, there have been more than 150 research studies to check out using different methodology. So if you want to know how various studies contributed a lot, you will find they come out with a statement: it is true, the development of vocabulary is tremendous and phenomenal in the 3-year-old group, which was a revelation, but it's tied to various things. In US, they saw it as a function of the socio-economic status, educational status of the parents. And this led to a lot of preschool education, which supplemented the lack of what was happening in the poor homes. So, what did they say? What was the final conclusion? Talk to the child, read to the child, play with the child. Even newborn, start then. Because language acquisition starts straight after birth by making sounds. So start reading to the child. So this became a dictum that this is what all parents do. So in Finland, when they say send the nursing mother home, they send her with box of books. So read to the child. This is very important learning which comes from US. So I kept wondering, how then, what about our rural women? How about our illiterate women? Are they without culture? So what is happening? So I was doing a study of early childhood in Ramnagaram village, urban Ramnagaram and rural Ramnagaram village, studying their development, language development and all realms of development. And I found their language development of preschool 3-year-olds was fine. So then I started at the child rearing practices. The mother is constantly talking to the child, telling her to do this, telling her to do that. A lot of oral communication goes on. They're sung songs. They're shown how they dance in their villages. So there is active, full, living culture available for children to pick up. So I found our tribal children in no way were backward in terms of the cultural inputs. And that I saw personally in my work with the tribal children in many ashram schools. So I have been working with ashram schools for 20 years. And I started with the conviction that first, if you want to introduce study language, you have to start early, but you have to present to them the material in such a way it's attractive. So teaching language more through storylines is what I used. So you read a whole story and then entire story is repeated again and again few times, and then you find suddenly the child is repeating it. Initially it's rote, but then top-down reading instead of top-up reading that generally is practiced. So top-down reading was very useful. And at that time, children also said, these children were being taught Kannada. Said, we want to talk English. We want to hear English. So I said, if they want it, it's my job to give it to them. So parallelly, I took the literature, like Ladybird books, in large Xeroxes, started showing. Within 20 sessions, the kids were doing the books, both in Kannada and in English. Then I thought, what are we doing for 5 years in classroom if we can do it so easily with these kind of books? And in addition, teachers would ask, what are you doing? We have had all NCERT training. We know how to be child-centered, how to work this and that. Then I examined 5 class syllabus of NCERT. Then, so what is required? Colors, shapes, size, volume, numbers. You know, maths is, this is really FLN. You need both language and you need maths also. So I was following this technique for a very long time and found children were pretty good in most of the things. After, we give the school material and give some for them to do, like drawing sheets and crayons for them to keep. And I developed almost a technology for it. So then I said, I will do a primer. I will do a Kannada English primer. So this is the NCERT syllabus. Lessons are basic. And body movements. This is through nursery rhymes. They have their own local nursery rhymes, then there are English nursery rhymes. You make them sing and dance for both. So that body movements, then we give them another section in maths where there is concrete learning, more complex learning with drawings, with numbers, from concrete to more complex level, fractions. So up to 5th class. But we did a trick. We didn't want the teachers to humiliate them. We said the answers are given below the sums. You look at the answer, change, take an eraser, change and correct it. So that child doesn't need anybody to teach them. Answers are all below at the end of the book. Then several activities which are suited. And we found, and we would give the book to the child along with a drawing book and a box of crayons to manage on their own. And this was a product post-COVID because all our tribal children were away. And we had to do something, give them something to have. So this is what we gifted them with. So I have this, just for sample, I've given a couple of pages. So this in English and Kannada. And we did one more exercise. He said, our pictures are not very beautiful. Will you color them? So they enjoyed filling the color into each of the pictures in an appropriate way. You know, we didn't say that it's a book, it's very precious, you shouldn't do anything. We give them full permission to damage the book in matter they want because it's their possession. And when it's with them the whole time, they look at it again and again and learn more and enjoy reading. So I keep telling the teachers, if you just give some tiffin once, is that enough? They have to have food all the time. Similarly, they have to books around them all the time. Expose children to books, story books. So this next one. Other published materials are by Storywell. That's the Delhi publisher. They are doing bilingual books. They will do it in different languages. But right now, for example, this my book they have done in Hindi. So they do their own for higher concepts also. So you can go to their website and see what they have. Next one. Okay. Now I had a small video. As you know, they develop glitches. So this is something very practical. I brought this book here 2 years back. All the wild animals in color like this for them to understand. And the content is this a maths content like this, and 10 lessons, and lot of other activities at the end for the child. Draw a picture and make it into a jigsaw puzzle. So there are multiple activities in it, and it keeps them busy. Okay. Now, when I recommend books, I feel guilty because in India there are hardly any books most people can afford. So this I produced, and I could sell it 2-3 years back at 54. I mean, I wasn't selling them, I was just giving this away. Then I find the cost of books went up tremendously. We made the half size. Then I thought it's okay. Children have small hands, we'll give them small books. So now the size is this, and I have made it for 54 rupees for the entire book. This was, you can't get it that cheap. So all I'm saying is, material, these are very hard to get. If anybody wants to use this, I have not given the copyrights, it's on public domain. Anybody wants to take these books, like if you want to Xerox and supply to this whole group, I'm quite happy for that. And then you can take to your own state and do it somewhat similar, but always culturally adopt them. Dresses may be different. So you can use it the way you want, but this is an actually activity book for children so that they can spoil it.
Thank you, Professor Malvika.
Thank you.
Because of shortage of time, I would have to request Professor Girish Nath Jha to address the gathering as well. But I'm sure that as you're addressing, a lot of us can make use of the books that ma'am has also brought in.
Thank you. Thank you, Subin, for inviting me. And I'm so happy to be here. Lovely afternoon in Pune and a prestigious university. My thanks to the secretary and joint secretary, additional secretary, and the other members of the team for inviting me to this very prestigious event today. And the topic is even more appealing. Thank you so much. Well, I think the task is very difficult. Difficult in the sense that we are going to educate, teach very young kids, and in a multilingual setting, multi-scriptal setting. India is home to more than 19,500 languages, as reported by last census. Out of those, 270 mother tongues. And the new education policy emphasizes mother tongue learning and also the FLN learning, both together. And we have 121 language groups, bigger languages, and out of those, 22 are in our schedule, right? And 23rd is English, the Dada language, right? And out of 22 languages, we have 4 language families. And we grow in a multilingual, multiscriptal setting, and learning in Indian languages would have been easier compared to learning a script, which is Roman, which is not phonetic script. Roman is not phonetic. We have difficulties in pronouncing words and also learning spellings. Indian language scripts are evolved from Brahmi, they're phonetic scripts, right? Two scripts in India are not phonetic, Persian, Arabic, and Roman, and others are phonetic scripts. So we are basically a sound community. We have evolved from, sounds. Our languages are more phonetic. Entire Rig Veda is just song. Panini's grammar is just song, right? So we have been teaching people to memorize songs of our Shastra's texts. And learning through storage, Panchatantra, Hitopadesha, Jataka. Very old practice in India. Learning through songs, learning through stories, learning through dialogues and debates, not learning through reading and writing. This came much later to India, so we have to adapt to this new situation, right? So we have a very difficult task. We have become an almost 200 years in Macaulay's principles, 1835. We are going to be 200 years in 2035. And there is a compulsion of English in at least higher education. How can we get rid of that? How can we stop the end of the अंग्रेजी की अनिवार्यता को कैसे समाप्त करें? ये बहुत बड़ा एक प्रश्न चिन्ह हमारे लिए है. So what has become of us, from the Macaulay system, from Guru Shishya Parampara, we had oral tradition, education orally transmitted, right? And Macaulay's strictly alphabetic system, right? We have to read and write. So person may be educated, but he's not literate. So we call him asakshara, ashikshita. The person might be educated. एक गांव का किसान जो कठिन से कठिन परिस्थिति में अपने परिवार का लालन पालन कर लेता है, वो ज्यादा शिक्षित है, ना कि वो पीएचडी विद्यार्थी जो थोड़ी सी कठिन परिस्थिति में आत्महत्या कर लेता है. तो देखिए फर्क देखिए. So we have to redefine what education is actually. We had our own experimental based content and content based on local issues, to a model based on colonial prerogatives. Our curricula was based on colonial prerogatives. Vedanga, Anvikshiki, debate, discussion. And two, strictly physics, chemistry, biology. Now the new education policy is bringing in minor concepts, so we can have multiple subjects. Earlier, a physics guy could not study chemistry. Chemistry guy could not study, biology. But our ancient, Shastric people, they wrote even poetry, and mathematics guy would write poetry. A philosophy guy could do, nuclear physics. So there was no strict compartmentalization of subjects. From humanistic universalization to based on ethics and values, what we have done today, it is based on self-centered greed, individualism, Western principles, rampant destruction of resources. All of that we have learned from Macaulay's system. It's not simply English medium. It is basically the culture that has gotten to us. Whenever I visit many other countries in Europe, they say we don't have problem with English language, but the Anglicism which comes with English, that is the problem, right? The culture which is much more problematic. Next slide, please. So NEP luckily has given two very good principles, which is emphasis on mother tongue, which is a hard task to achieve, and the universal literacy and numeracy. I was very happily looking at your talk, madam, and you've done work with the NIMHANS. So a lot of work done by funding from DST. There's a cognitive science research initiative. I'm a member of that, and the fund goes to many universities, and they do a lot of work on readability, simplification of text, etc. Those should be brought in. Right. So these are hard tasks, and we have set ourselves a very tough task, and we can achieve that. And my argument is that we cannot achieve all of them manually only, involving human labor only. We have to have technology and a very distinct nature of technology. I'm going to focus on that. Please, next slide, please. So look at the ground realities. We have 70% of India villages and 780 or 90 universities, colleges, standalone institutions, and about 250 million students, 50 million at primary levels, right? And these are the languages. I already mentioned that. And 90% of India does not speak English. So if you're forcing English to 90% of India, That is a crime, right? We have been doing that. Luckily, this government has been very strong in focusing on Indian languages, and I'm very happy to note that we're going to get results very soon. Now, let's go to the next slide, please. So obviously, we cannot do it alone without technology. We have to have technology and a lot of AI tools. And our languages lack digital content, and AI needs digital content. To train a large language model, we need a lot of corpora, a lot of data in all languages, right? We have 19,568 languages. Remember, we have to get a lot of data. And AI models need language data. How do you actually get over that? Next slide, please. So look at there was a survey done on Indian languages or the languages websites on the internet, most popular websites, and our languages don't figure anywhere there. So the most popularly used Indian language is Hindi, and we have 0.1% content in Hindi alone. Go back to the next slide, please. Yeah, Hindi happens to be the fourth largest language in terms of people using it. If you combine Urdu, Urdu becomes third most spoken language, and the content is 0.1% on internet in terms of websites, right? And look at the languages, 15 Indo-Aryan, North Indian languages. I don't believe in this language family business. I have a book which actually talks against the language family. I believe that we should have a Indic family, and all languages actually have come from Indic family, and there are arguments for that. So 4 Dravidian, 2 Tibeto-Burman, 1 Austro-Asiatic Santhali, 2 Tibeto-Burman, Bodo and Manipuri, 4 Dravidian, 15 Indo-Aryan. Next slide, please. These are the population statistics. We have almost 96% people speaking about 19 languages of India, 4 Dravidian and 15 Indo-Aryan. And then the remaining a small percentage of people. And so we have to focus on a small percentage of languages, where there'll be languages dying and getting endangered, right? So this is our focus should be. Next slide, please. Look at our languages and the scripts. Devanagari is the biggest script. And then we have followed by Bangla and then other scripts. Look at Perso-Arabic being used for Urdu and Kashmiri and also perhaps for Sindhi and Old Chiki. So these are the scripts. And we need to make sure our kids learn script effortlessly. Our scripts are phonetic, so it will be easier learning our script than learning Roman. Next, please. Hindi does much better on YouTube because Hindi is at least 5% representation on YouTube because it is videos, mostly videos. If you have to write content, then our representation goes much down because we don't have enough tools for writing Indian languages, digitally. But we can speak and record videos that is much better, and our languages will grow on that front much faster than creating websites in Indian languages because of technology not supporting there. But more than 500 million Indians using internet, and about 90% or more using Indian languages, or at least demanding Indian languages. That's the best part. Next, please. Now, English is an important language, you all agree. This seminar is being held in English language mostly. But making it compulsory is the problem, right? So a student, very bright student, comes to IIT Delhi. He has passed his 12th in Hindi medium and comes to IIT Delhi, and he's being lectured in English language. He goes into depression. So what to do to help such students? So how to achieve mass education of this 90% population in India? And that is the challenge, right? Next slide, please. So what is the requirements? If you have to go for mass education using technology, what is the requirement? Next slide. So it has to be mother tongue based, multilingual, multimodal. Multimodal means no requirement for reading and writing. Excuse me. It must cater to diverse oral traditions. It must be independent of literacy. We cannot call a person literate if he knows only the scripts, right? Literacy is something that's come from the West. We have to disregard this thing. Person is knowledgeable if he knows subject matter, not the script. And highlight education, not degrees, and free of cost or cost effective. That is the model that we have to have. Next. We'll need 2 kinds of technology, the educational technology, e-learning, and the language technology, driven artificial intelligence. Next. So how much time do I have? About 5, 10 minutes. Okay, good. Thank you so much. So we need a lot of tools like basic IO tools. For example, I'm giving a lecture in English language. The machine is going to type it, machine is going to translate it, machine is going to convert to speech in multiple Indian languages. So my English language lecture right now gets transmitted in speech form in all Indian languages. If we need speech-to-speech technology, we need real-time machine translation. Very quick. I'm speaking and my lecture is being heard in multiple Indian languages, real-time, right? Text, dialogue, speech, all these technologies have to be there. Not easy, but then, we have to do it. And education technology, server-based, cost-effective, easy content creation, learning management system. We were talking about, how to manage learning, readability, how much a student has learned actually. Dynamic, interactive content with sufficient multimedia. I've done animation of Panchatantra Hitopadesha Jataka on my server. I have a server called Sanskrit in JNU, which does all that. And, useful content to help learn livelihood. Education must have purpose. Nobody will get degree just for the sake of getting a degree, right? How does this degree help you in learning, in earning a livelihood? Next slide, please. So what would be an ideal e-learning solution for India? Let's see. Go next slide, please. Yeah. Dynamic content. Culture quotient has to be very high because we have a lot of different cultures in India. Usefulness of the content. Multimodal, should handle speech and gestures. I'm teaching through speech and gesture. You are not able to hear me, but you can still learn from my gesturing. Should understand user queries, dialogue, multilingual content creation on the fly using machine translation, and must be delivered on mobile tabs and has to be free. And I'm always highlighting the free and cost-effective in India. It works in India. If you want to, want payment mechanism, it will not work. Please understand that. Free is the buzzword in India, right? Next slide, please. So what is desirable and what do we need to do most urgently? So we can have plan 1, plan 2, plan 3. So first plan is 2025, where we have to attain universal, FLN. Next slide. Using AI in e-learning. You have to have AI and it has to be Indian AI and Indian data centers, right? Intelligent simulation of actual learning in society. How do we simulate learning, right? Involves a multilinguality, multimodality, multi-script capability, all of that. Please, next slide, please. And AI can be used to enhance language processing and understanding capacity of machines in lesson summarization. So big lesson, child is not interested in going through big lesson, big story. So child, shows disinterest. He quickly flips the page. Machine knows that this child is not interested. So the page comes back with a summary, with animation. So we convert text to images for the sake of the children, right? So big story, child is not interested. The lesson is reproduced with smaller text and animation for the child's benefit. Lesson simplification to aid readability. Lesson is too tough. A lot of difficult words are used in the lesson. You can track the eye movement of the child, and then we can come back with simpler lesson simplification. A lot of people are working on lesson readability issues. I know IT Kharagpur is working on that. And lesson reader speech synthesis is converted to speech. Lessons appropriateness to the culture and to the child, right? You must have gone through, the translated Pogo content in Hindi is dangerous for our living rooms. Our children watching this foreign content translated in Hindi and Indian language is very dangerous because they bring in foreign culture, which we think are harmless, but they are not harmless actually, right? And dialogue systems and script and handwriting, all of that has to be very, very importantly built into AI. And the performance of targeted expert systems. Expert system machine is that machine which is a tutor to you, single, a one-to-one tutor. And machines must be natural. I remember there was a big seminar on naturalness of animations, and customization of lessons specific to the learner. All of that. Please, next slide, please. So what does India do, and what does my current organization? I'm chairman of the Commission of the Scientific and Technical Terminology. I'm not director. I'm the chairman of the commission, right? Right. And then, so what is the current role? Our mandate is to create technical terminology, scientific terminology in all Indian languages, in all subjects. Massive, massive mandate, right? We're currently focusing on only the 22, scheduled languages, but our mandate is much more beyond. And not only there, after we create terminology in Indian languages, we then ask our textbook boards to create content. And then that goes to the universities or schools for education. And this is a massive, massive initiative. We cannot do it manually involving human manpower. We have to have machines to do it. And we are very progressively moving towards that. Please go through. Next slide, please. So we need to create terminology and content in all subjects and all domains for all languages. Right. I'm very quickly going to focus on the koshas that we have done for school. 1 to 5. We have 3 levels, 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 12. We call it Shiksharthi koshas. And our Shiksharthi koshas are done in Hindi and then all of the Indian languages and then passed on to people like NCRT and other organizations to write textbooks and other things. And we are currently revising our Shiksharthi koshas. And for that, we have to study all the boards, etc. A lot of research has to go in, actually. And then we first I've started a new initiative that will first create words in English language, select words in English language, that translate all of them into Sanskrit first, and then give it to all Indian languages to adapt, to see how much of Sanskrit can be accepted, and if not, then how much new things can be added. That will simplify the work, right? And then university level, we have science and technology, humanities, social science, multidisciplinary, a lot of areas. And what I have done, our textbooks were there, and our books were there, our dictionaries, and people did not know about our dictionary. So I have created a searchable engine myself on my laptop, and I have given screenshots of this search engine, which is going to be live on shabda.education.gov.in. We have gotten this domain, and it will be live there with this interface. So when you open that in about 2 weeks' time, I would say, you can do this, language-wise search, subject-wise search, dictionary type, and language pairs. If you enter a search, like our translators, they need to open our books. They don't need to open our books anymore. They can have this URL and a mobile app. They will type a word. For example, they type a word administration. Go to the next slide, please. And they get word administration in all Indian languages, in all dictionaries. And if a word is in Malayalam, for example, my system detects non-Devanagari script and translates that into Devanagari. So I was surprised when I found that the word prashashan in Hindi is bharanam in Malayalam. Much more Sanskrit down south. Much more convergence in India. So barring the languages, like I found that words in Bodo and Santhali and Tamil and perhaps some other languages are slightly different, but most other languages converge a lot using Sanskrit words. So you can see the non-Devanagari script being translated into Devanagari. I mean, skin is rather short here.
Professor,
and after you search this word,
unfortunately, we'll have
how many? 5 minutes?
Yeah, we are almost done with time, so
2 minutes, 2 minutes more.
a minute
Okay.
at max. Sorry.
Quickly, let's go through the screenshots very quickly. I've also added a feedback process where you can give feedback to the dictionaries. Let's go back quickly. This is a feedback. If you don't like a word, you add this is the correct word and enter. If feedback gets saved, I enter this word. Next slide, please. And look at this dictionary where all the namaskar word for Indian language is all across the same. Let's go back. Please, next slide, please. We need computers to create content in all Indian languages using machine translation. And in machine translation, India has nice initiatives. Next slide, please, very quickly. And next slide, please. See, there are 3 initiatives in India: Bhashini by MIT, and then ICMAS by PSA. My principal scientific advisor, I'm in the committee there too. Anuvadini, again, is an AICT initiative supported by all these organizations. And next slide, please. So these initiatives and the academia in India actually are working very hard to make this AI possible for multiple Indian languages. Let's go back. Next slide. Industry also working in different areas. Google, Microsoft. Next slide, please. So finally, bingo, I'm at the summary stage. We need our own education model, drawing from the best our ancient tradition has and modernity offers. And I'm very happy that new education policy does the best from both the traditions. Content creation has to be done at a feverish pitch, very, very fast content creation. We have to use AI tools like machine translation, summarization, speech, OCR, etc. Deliver education using e-learning platforms, simple platforms, user-friendly platforms. We have to have India's own multilingual, adaptive, scalable AI. Remember, we can't just use algorithms and retrain. Like, ChatGPT is not going to last longer. I know that. We have to have our own, we have to edit the algorithms and retrain large language models with our own language data. and India's own data centers. Remember, we can't train on a GPU server using Amazon or Microsoft or Google, because data will be there. So we have to have our own data center. We have to do all these things, and with that, certainly, I'm very sure we'll be able to succeed very fast. Next slide, please. And we have these questions in Indian languages. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Girish, and I'm very sorry I had to interrupt you in between. Let me now request Dr. Dheer Jhingran for his address.
Good afternoon, everyone. And the presentation. Sabhi ko namaskar, and I really apologize for making you wait, but I'm going to take 20 minutes. And my biggest hope is that I keep you engaged for 20 minutes. We get back to FLN, and this one, please. Yeah. So we know that all of us sitting here are engaged in FLN. We are trying our best in the States to try and ensure that children's learning outcomes improve. And all of you are doing a great job. I'm also working with some states. And I think that deserves really great appreciation. However, I think if we have to achieve FLN outcomes, there are two gaps. The first is what Dr. Malavika Kapoor mentioned. We've got to have a very strong early childhood education, because if that is not strong, we cannot achieve FLN just in classes 1 to 3. The second, which is not so often mentioned, is the fact that in many parts of the country, children's languages, familiar languages, are quite different from the language used at school. And when they join grade 1, they really cannot comprehend what's happening at school. This is not a small problem. Estimates are that there are about 25 to 30% children in the country who are sitting in early classrooms but not comprehending what's happening there. So it's a big issue. I was in Haryana the other day, again for a G20 state conference, and I was surprised. A few district education officers mentioned how there is a challenge about some of the children. They speak Bhavalpuri, a Punjabi dialect. Some of them speak Purvanchali, they've migrated. And Haryana is a state we don't normally associate with language issues. So the problem is quite widespread, and we have to see how we can try and do things at scale, simple, pragmatic solutions. As soon as a language issue comes, people think of 1,000 languages. NEP says we've got to use this as mediums of instruction. This is not doable, right? So I think we've got to look at how pragmatically we are able to introduce children's languages in the classroom without necessarily making all of them mediums of instruction. So that will be the focus of my presentation. This is clearly understood that all learning, whether it's thinking, speaking, reasoning, talking, reading, writing, happens through the medium of language. And language is the vehicle through which learning really happens. Halliday, who's a very famous linguist, had said that learning language is not like learning other subjects. It is like learning the foundation of learning. So it's very important, but what language will serve that purpose? A language that a child understands and speaks. Only then it can become a language. That's the foundation for learning. So I won't go through this. I think just quick reading. We are talking about reading fluency, better understanding and comprehension if the language is known to children, positive self-image. Children feel emotionally adjusted in the classroom if a language that they understand well is used. It does improve learning in all subjects. There are several large studies which show that. Classrooms are more interactive. And of course, it helps to learn other languages as well. And please see what I've said at the title. Learning through or with a familiar language is crucial. We cannot always introduce all children's languages as mediums of instruction. But can we bring them to the classroom so that language is available while children learn? Sorry for this slightly technical stuff, but very simply, reading comprehension is the key to learning. Do all of us agree? Because children need to learn and read through textbooks. India is still trying to do well at PISA. And the PISA test is just about reading comprehension. But reading comprehension comes from two major strands. One is to be able to read quickly, because you've got to decode words and read them quickly. And the other is language comprehension. Language comprehension is vocabulary, verbal reasoning, etc. So if this does not get developed, then children will not become skilled readers. And just as an activity here, are you able to read any of these texts? You're able to probably read or pronounce the words maybe on the other side, but not here, right? But you're not able to understand them. So that's where language comprehension comes. Even if you're able to decode, it's not enough. And please remember, this is a product. It's not plus. Word recognition multiplied by language comprehension gives reading comprehension. I'm not trying to be technical, very simple. If language comprehension is low, but a child is able to read the words, reading comprehension will still be very low because it's a product, right? Anything multiplied, suppose you say, child is very good in word recognition, 1 out of 1. Language comprehension is 0.1. What is the product? It's just 0.1, right? So reading comprehension really doesn't work unless both of these are done well. And we need to bridge the gap between a language that the child understands and the language used at school. NEP and Nipun Bharat have talked about this very strongly, but NEP talks about using languages as mediums of instruction, which is not easy. And we also know that in many states there is a push to include or have English even as a medium of education, at least in the schools of excellence. So there's a big tension between these two. So what I'm suggesting now in the next 10 minutes is a pragmatic, practical way in which children's languages can be brought into the classroom. Children will learn better, they will comprehend better. We don't have to introduce all of them as mediums of instruction, which is a good way, is an ideal way of doing it, but that's not very feasible. And the NCF foundational stage, of which I was a part, basically says that at the foundational stage, the medium of instruction should be child's home or familiar language. Obviously, from ages 3 to 8, a language the child understands. Also, child can be exposed to multiple languages. As Malavika ji said, a child has the ability to pick up many languages, even English, if it's done orally. A child, the language acquisition device that she talked about is for natural acquisition, not for teaching. So young children learn a language through rich natural exposure, not through teaching. And then the first literacy should be in the child's language. And then by grade 3, a child could become an independent reader or writer in at least one language. That's an NCFFS. Many of you may have seen this. But our classrooms are very diverse. All of you know about your state situations. There are classrooms where there are children with one home language. They don't understand what's, the language used in the textbooks. In some cases, there are multiple languages inside a classroom, right? There are multiple variants of a language, which we often call dialects. Sometimes the teachers don't understand the language of children. So situations are really very diverse in our context, and we have to design solutions that can cater to these situations. I will not go through this. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so just for example, even in one district, this is for Bastar here, for Dungarpur in Rajasthan, Chhindwara in Madhya Pradesh, even within a district, there's so much variation that really it's very difficult to have a clear solution for MLE, for multilingual education. But we must also remember that languages are not equal. We take pride in saying we are multilingual. We are a multilingual society. But languages, there is a hierarchy. And that is why it's often not easy to introduce these languages in the classroom, because there's a feeling that this language is inferior. It is not fit to be a formal, not even a medium, but formally used in the classroom. So that's a challenge. And it was mentioned about awareness. I think you mentioned about awareness of these issues. So estimates say that about 25 to 30% in children in India face a learning disadvantage because they're studying through an unfamiliar medium of instruction. And these children are, of course, remote tribal habitations. The second is where the home language is very different from the standard language. For example, Bundeli in southern Uttar Pradesh, in Lalitpur district, let's say, or Bagheli in Madhya Pradesh, bordering Uttar Pradesh. The language is so different that children actually do not understand standard Hindi at that time. Interstate border areas, Koraput district in Orissa, Telugu-speaking population, bordering Andhra Pradesh. And what do we do there? Similarly, Chhindwara district, Marathi-speaking people. Migrants in Kerala, migrants in Raipur from Orissa, and seasonal migrants, those who go for say, sugarcane harvesting from Gujarat to Maharashtra, or they go from Orissa to Andhra Pradesh for brick kiln work, they actually face a huge issue because even if they get admitted to schools, the language there is quite different. So that they're very disadvantaged. And then, as has been pointed out, I think the most disadvantaged are children who are forced to learn through English as a medium from preschool. That's definitely a big language disadvantage. I must commend Chhattisgarh state. They actually did something called a language mapping in the entire state for 30,000 schools to understand what are children's home languages, how much of Hindi do they understand when they come to school, how much does the teacher know of children's languages, and are there some linked languages in that area. So it gave a very clear picture of what are the challenges and what can be done about them. Multilingual education sounds a big word. We grapple with it. People say different things. I'll try and make it very simple about what can be done. And please don't bother about these things. But there are three big ways in which children's languages can be included. I'm coming to the end of my presentation. One is you introduce that language as a medium of instruction, right? For example, Gondi in a tribal area, and let children learn through Gondi medium for 3 to 5 years, and then they transit to, let's say, Hindi, if Hindi is the state language. Hindi is taught alongside so that they know enough English by the time they have to shift to Hindi. Sorry, they learn enough Hindi by the time they have to shift to Hindi. But the problem here is this, that it's very intensive. Many languages to make as a medium of instruction, also ensuring that there is good transition. What happens is there's failure at the time of transition between Gondi and Hindi. Children haven't learned enough Hindi to be able to learn through Hindi at that time. You may have heard of Sardar Patel Vidyalaya in Delhi, which teaches Hindi medium until class 5, and then from class 6 is English medium. But they ensure that by class 5, children have learned very good English to be able to negotiate the entire text in English. I'm not advocating for the option 1. I'm actually advocating for option 2, which is that the state language could remain, state or the regional language, could remain as the medium of instruction, but children's languages are included formally, at least in the oral domain. There's a lot of conversation that happens, a lot of explanation. Children are able to express themselves, and that is the solution that we can do at scale. It's being tried out. It's being implemented in several districts in the country. Of course, we've also got to look at situations where teachers do not know the children's languages. So broadly, these are the three things that can be done. And I'll focus right now on second one, which I said can be done at scale. So we don't have to change the medium of instruction, but we have to ensure that children's languages remain in the classroom and are used by the teacher and by children. So in the initial period, most of the teaching and learning happens in that language. Later, there is a balanced use of the familiar language and the language of the school. L1 and L2 are balanced, sometimes use more. When children start learning more of L2, then that can be increased. A mixed language use is very useful. Rather than saying this is a pure English class, this is a pure Hindi class, no other language is allowed. Children actually learn through using and trying out languages. Those are not errors. They are ways of learning a new languages. So encouraging use of mixed language, and of course, use children's home language to learn other languages, reading and writing, and children's cultural context. If that is brought in, it's much easier to learn an unfamiliar language. I can't summarize the whole strategy, but this strategy, without introducing new mediums of instruction, how can we help children work on learn the unfamiliar language while actually doing a lot of discussion and oral work in that in a familiar language. I don't know if I can play it. Can this video be played? Just 1 minute. A language class where you can see how there's a mix of, there's no sound.
तो तौरे पर आते तौरे पर आते हैं नावा में जात रहो तौरे पर नहीं आई तो किसे करी देखता था वो फुगला बना रहता क्यों है फिर उतार उसमें ऊपर जाएंगे ये सब कमाल लो तो ट्यूब भी नहीं होई सकती कौन नहीं बता सर लकड़ी पे बैठेंगे तो ऐसे ऐसे करेंगे लकड़ी उसको बांध दो.
Okay. This is grade 1 children. Because the teachers using their language, they're also using the language. And Hindi is being used. Hindi is the medium here. But they learn very organically. What if the teacher doesn't know the children's language? I don't have time to go into it, but certain things have happened in your states that we have picked up, which can be used in many places. English, I will just summarize by saying English is very important. But the best way to learn good English is not to start from preschool or grade 1. Children actually learn good, another unfamiliar language if they've got a foundation of one strong language. So I would advocate for English. At least orally we can do a lot of exposure, but not before grade 3 English literacy. The balloons there are, this is a theory which says balloon effect theory. If you do more of one language, the other language gets reduced. However, there's enough evidence to say languages grow interdependently. And if you were to make one language strong, it's easy to develop the other language. So in the end, multilingual education is actually home language plus state language plus L3, it could be English. It's about not using languages in watertight compartments, ensuring how children can play with these languages, learn them, and using the support from their languages, and not just for the language class, but also for other subjects. That's what is, and this is preaching to the choir, but if early childhood education, at least that should be mandatorily in the home language and not a formal language. Can we have teacher recruitment and deployment, which ensures that the teachers who know the language are in the correct places? With teacher eligibility tests, it's a bit of an issue, but still, FLN and multilingualism must come together. They're not separate programs. I go to some states and they say, we are doing FLN and we are doing multilingual education. No, the idea is that how do you learn good foundational skills by using children's languages and they're learning the main language. So that's very important. And of course, teacher education will play a big role in this because, and this
Dr. Dheer, we may have
this is the very last, yeah. So awareness of teachers, language mapping, creating a lot of children's materials, and working with our institutions to ensure that this issue gets highlighted. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Dheer. I'm sure that many of you have a lot of questions, like I also have a lot of questions to all the experts, but unfortunately because of limitation in time and because we have to head out for lunch, I would request all of you to keep your questions active and we'll take up these questions while we are having lunch. And let me also take the opportunity to thank all three experts, Professor Malvika Kapoor, Professor Girish Nath Jha, and Dr. Dheer Jingran for having given us so many insightful ideas and areas that we can start working on. Thank you very much, all of you.
We'd like to thank all the experts for an invigorating session. I invite Dr. Sanjay Dhole, Professor Sanjay Dhole, Department of Physics, to present the memento to our moderator, Professor Subin Sudhir. To Professor Malvika Kapoor, Visiting Professor NIAS. I request Professor Sanjay Dhole to present the token to Subin Sudhirji. I request Dr. Rajendra Vikhe Patil, Management Council member, to present the token to Professor Girish Nath Jha. And I request Dr. Sagar Vaidya, Management Council member, to present the token to Dr. Dheer Chingran. We are breaking for lunch and will be back exactly at 2:45 p.m. And we will be first viewing a film on FLN, followed by representations on the same theme by state representatives. So we'll be back at 2:45 p.m.